when Martin was doing his things with John Lewis, the bones of this talk were done in support of that. So I've put some new images in. Apologies to people who've seen some of them before as well, because there's some old ones. And really, it's about why I take photographs and what I do with them. And the first thing is, it's for memories. I mean, I think these are the important pictures for all of us. It's the family, birthdays, the holidays. And I'm not going to say any more about them because that's really their sort of everybody's private things, but they're the ones that are perhaps important. Then the other thing, and this is what I'm mainly going to talk about tonight, what I call my collections. I think, you know, I was a small boy on the station platform recording engine numbers, but even as a child, I really didn't think it was fair to take eggs out of birds' nests. That's people collected eggs, but I didn't want to do that. I really didn't like seeing butterflies pinned into boxes, and so one way of getting around that as a collector is to take photographs. And of course, taking photographs has got a lot easier. So most of it's going to be about my collections, but I've got a couple of other things that I do as well. And first of all, I like to enter competitions, and it's the only time I've ever done a still life was for the annual challenge. And similarly, lots of genre. I'll go out and try and take specific pictures, but for a lot of things, pictures from my memories or my collections will work. And then the final thing I just want to mention are photo books. And for many of us, our hard drives are going to crash. The CDs are going to deteriorate. Years from now, we might not have the technology to read what's on memory sticks. I'm sure in time to come, all my precious prints will get chucked in a skip. But photo books have got a chance to survive time, I think. And just a couple of points. One is, if you do make a photo book, try and identify all the people that are in it, because there's nothing worse than looking through a box of old photographs and finding you don't know who anybody is. And the other thing is to try and make a theme, a bit like doing an AV. And I did sort of a This Is Your Life book for my granddaughter when she was 5. She loved it. When she was 9, she came to me and said, "Grandad, do you do books for 10-year-olds? I've got 6 grandchildren. I've done 6 5-year-old books, 5 10-year-old books, and I'm now working on a 15-year-old book." And I kind of like to think that when my 15-year-old granddaughter is 75, she might be showing her granddaughter, "This is the book that your great-great-granddad made for me when I was a girl." And so I do think photo books are a worthwhile thing to do, but let's move on. In my sort of wildlife collections, I've split this into 6 different sections. First of all, it's identification, using the camera to identify things. And then a little bit about where and when and how you can take pictures. So I'm going to go straight into the identification bit. And in a way, this is a memory as well. I was on Cleve Hill early in the morning, and I've never seen anything like it. The air was full of butterflies. There wasn't ones or tens, there must have been hundreds in my recollection. And they'd obviously just recently hatched. This one settled on my hand. Now, I knew straight away it was a fritillary. I knew that amount about butterflies, but I didn't know what sort of fritillary. So I managed to take other pictures. I couldn't wait to get home, look them up in a book, and I found out this is a dark green fritillary. The markings are distinctive. But if we move on to this one, this is a silver wash fritillary. So dark green fritillaries, it turns out, when you read it up, are present over the whole country, very strong flyers. You see them all over the place. Whereas the silver wash fritillary likes woodland clearings. That's one of the butterflies that's in decline a bit, since people are not doing coppicing anymore to the same extent. You could tell it's a fritillary. You could be excused for not knowing which one. It's only once you've identified them and really tracked them down, you can sort of tell them apart. But that just gives you an idea. It's a dark green fritillary on the left, and a silver wash fritillary on the right. And you can see they're obviously the same family, but really quite different. And that's one place where the camera really helps you to identify what it is you've seen, and you know what you're going to subsequently going to label it and call it. When we're still on butterflies, this is a small skipper. Perhaps not my best picture of a small skipper, but I'm showing you this particular one because I want you to look at the antennae. And can you see my pointer, Roger?
Yep.
Yeah. I want to show the antennae because the antennae, the tips of the antennae are brown. And this little butterfly is about the size of a thumbnail, really quite common. And there's another one, almost identical. In fact, they say that it's virtually impossible to tell apart, and that's the Essex skipper. And the Essex skipper, as its name suggests, started over east of us. Recently, there's been reports that it's reached the 7. The only way you can tell easily, just by looking at it, is it's got black tips to the antennae. And this one I found in my garden. I was very excited because I was looking at it through binoculars from 2 or 3 yards away, and I thought, that's got black antennae. So I managed to get into a position where I could get low enough to photograph it and show the antennae. So I know now that I've added to my collection an Essex skipper. Another funny little beast, and I was at my brother-in-law's house in the Forest of Dean, and this landed on the table. Now, I hadn't a clue what it was, but before they squashed it or moved it away, I wanted a picture. And I photographed it from the front and from the side and from above. And again, when I got home, I found it's called a 2-banded longhorn. And again, you look into it a little bit, and a 2-banded longhorn, the grubs live on rotting tree stumps. So it's not a harmful sort of beetle. And they've got a preference for pine logs. And my brother-in-law house in the Forest of Dean is right next to a pine forest. So that all sort of ties together. So move on to fungi and how the camera can help you identify fungi. These 2 fungi were growing about a yard apart, maybe 2 yards apart in a field. One of them's poisonous and one of them's edible. And I think when you're taking photographs of fungi, you really need to get as much information as you can. If we turn these 2 over, then you'll find that the one on the right is a field mushroom. The one on the left, which I didn't know at the time, I had to come back and look it up in a reference book, is a white dapperling. The white dapperling is poisonous. The field mushroom, of course, is good and tasty. And just odd little differences and things to look for is this one's got a more prominent ring, and it's got a mottled upper stem, and the gills run up the stem. On some fungi, the gills run down the stem. So all these things are sort of important in trying to identify a fungi. And we move on. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen this picture before. It's perhaps one of my most successful pictures. But the reason I'm showing it again now is because I wanted to try and pick up as much information as I could so that I could be sure of the identification. And here you can see the gills. You can see the way the stem changes from this shaggy scale to a plainer stem. And so to take this, I was laid flat on my stomach. I had 17 to 50 mil standard lens. I had some baking foil, which I'd wrapped up and then opened out to reflect light up underneath to try and be able to see the gills. And so there's quite a lot in that picture that tells you about that fungi without having to sort of turn it over or do something else with it. But they are, by the way, called shaggy scaly caps. Interestingly, though, that was taken with a 17 to 50 mil lens. This next one was taken with a 500 mil lens. It was growing in the middle of a bog, and really no way I could get near it. I had to use a 500 mil lens, and not a clue as to what it was, but I'm fortunate in that I've got a friend who's an expert. I sent him the photograph, and he told me that it was called Lentinus tigrinus, and I suppose it does look a bit tiger striped, but quite rare, quite unusual. But this was taken with a full whack on a 500mm lens. So it's really a matter of trying to capture as much detail as you can when you're looking at fungi. So I'll move on, and we'll have just a little look at hoverflies. And hoverflies are really quite interesting. And I saw my first hoverfly when I realized what it was 3 or 4 years ago. Started to look them up, and they're fascinating insects. And you'll find that they come in across 68 genera. There's 283 species in the UK, and a lot of them you can tell apart. And this particular one has got a very long snout, and so it can feed on the insides of things like bluebells, or in this case, what was this on? Not the name of the plant, but I'm not good on plants anyway. Move along to another one. I'll move through these fairly quickly because this one's tiny. This one's called Sarita pipiens. It's probably less than 1/4 of an inch long, and it's very distinctive because it's got this huge swollen hind leg. This is actually on some fennel flowers. And so this was a tiny one. The other one was quite a big one. And here, I'm not sort of trying to take pictures for competitions or anything like that. I'm just trying to take pictures to get a really good identification of what it is that I'm looking at. So we'll move on to this one. This is about the size of a bee, really. And this one's called Eristalis pertinax. And there's a whole family around this area, all the same size. They're all honeybee mimics, but this one can be identified because it's the only one with yellow feet. And so here I was trying to photograph so that I could get the feet, and in fact it has actually had an acceptance in an international salon, but that wasn't the idea. It was really to try and see what colour the feet were, and in particular as well, this hind leg, the femur is bigger than the tibia. So we move on to another one in the same family, and this one is Eristalis tenax, and you can see straight away this one's got black feet. So you've got to try and get a photograph that tells you the colour of the feet on some of these. And also the most distinctive feature is that here the tibia is boomerang shaped and enlarged, almost as big as the femur. And that's really just the only way you can tell these two apart easily without doing more microscopic examination. So again, I'm very pleased to get this picture because I can see the legs, I can get a positive ID. But again, I've never thought about putting that into a salon because I think there's so much of it not in focus, but the bits that are in focus are the bits that I wanted. So move off insects onto flowers. I was walking in Yorkshire and saw this, and I'm not good on flowers, and I thought, well, it's not a primrose, and it's not a cowslip. Could it be an oxlip? Took some photographs, then had to go onto the internet and do some research, and it seems that oxlips are really only found over in Cambridgeshire in that sort of east part of the world. But there is a thing called a false oxlip, and that's really just a hybrid between a primrose and a cowslip. And the differences are just the way that the flowers spread out at the top of the stem. So really just quite interesting to see something that was unusual and that I haven't seen before. And then birds. This is a meadow pipit, and I didn't photograph it this way deliberately. You can see the hind claw, and I was very pleased that I was able to see the hind claw because meadow pipits and tree pipits are very, very similar. They can be just told apart by their flight pattern and I believe by their song, but visually very similar, but the tree pipit has got a much bigger curve on the hind claw. And so here, pretty sure this is a meadow pipit. And moving on, I was in Scotland up on the Mull of Kintyre, and on the shore there were these little birds that obviously pipits, and my first thought was that it was a rock pipit. It's quite interesting because rock pipits you often find near water. Water pipits you often find up in the mountains on the rocks if you can find them, but not as common as the tree pipits and the meadow pipits. And so I sort of made my mind up. This is probably a rock pipit because it's darker markings. But then when I got home and looked it up in a reference book, I found that rock pipits have got dark legs, very dark legs, and the flesh pink legs are really back to meadow pipit again. And also I can just see a hint of a claw on the rock there. So I talked to one or two friends who know more than me about it and came to the conclusion it's probably a meadow pipit, but I could happily stand corrected if anybody knows better. So that was all about using the camera and my photography for identification, and I'd just like to recommend a few books. The Pocket Guide to Butterflies of Great Britain and Ireland is really a very good book. It's just a little reference book. It's, I think, about £8 or £9. It's not an expensive book, but what's interesting is I've got a big reference book for butterflies of Europe. There's over 500 species in that. In the UK, we've only got 57, or some people say 59. So that's a number that you can get your head round and think about maybe trying to find most of them. And there's a very interesting book called The Butterfly Isles. And the Butterfly Isles are about a guy's pilgrimage, if you like, to see all the butterflies of the UK in one summer. And he managed it. But the one that I would recommend if you're interested in something just a bit different is a book called Rainbow Dust by Peter Maran. And that's a history of butterfly collecting and really history of butterfly knowledge, if you like. And it starts off in 1690 is the earliest reference to somebody in 1690 who started studying butterflies. And perhaps the only sort of story I'll pull out of it is that in the 1800s, ladies were often not able to join scientific societies. And some of the leading ladies who studied butterflies had to write under pseudonyms because they couldn't join the societies or put their names to things. One lady in particular, called Lady Glenville, has had a fritillary named after her. It's only found on the Isle of Wight, so I've never seen one. One day, maybe. Then hoverflies, there's a wild guide by Stuart Ball and Roger Morris, and all I can say is it's truly excellent. It covers an awful lot of the species and lots of notes, so it's great. Then for fungi, very difficult to get something that will give you good information. Fungi have been studied much more recently than most other aspects of natural history, because the fact that they spring up out of the ground led people to believe that perhaps they were the work of the devil, especially since some of them were poisonous. So the church, in its wisdom, didn't approve of studying fungi. So the interest of studying fungi is behind a lot of the other natural sciences. There's new ones being discovered every year, and there's thousands of them. And because there's so many, the little field guides that you get really don't cover it. It really needs a much deeper looking into if you want to be really interested. But there's two books. One's Fascinated by Fungi by a guy called Pat O'Reilly, who's got a website called First Nature. And it's not really about identifying fungi. It's full of things about fungi. He's got recipes in it of how to cook them. He's got information on trees and the sort of fungi that live on those trees. So really interesting read about the whole subject. Mushroom Miscellany by Patrick Harding is a very similar one, but that's got some brilliant colour pictures in it. And the thing that I can recommend Pat's book for is because out of the 1,000 and odd pictures, he's got, I think it's either 7 or 9 of my pictures in there. So I'm quite proud of that, really. So yeah, they're both interesting things if you're interested in fungi at all. And then moving on to birds, Hamlin Guide to Birds of Britain and Europe, just a very good guide. This is a shag taken up on the northeast coast of Scotland, like a small cormorant in a way, only shags are never seen inland. You only ever see them on sea cliffs. White under the chin. And I was interested because I stumbled across a bay where there were a lot of this and other birds on the cliffs. And I noticed that they were all on the north-facing or west-facing cliffs, and nothing on the south-facing cliffs, which I only speculate. I have no idea what the truth of the matter is, but it seemed to me that perhaps they were there because on the south-facing cliffs, it was going to get too hot for the eggs. But if anybody can enlighten me on that, I'd be pleased. So that's really about identification, really. So we move on to opportunity. And really, if you're going to take pictures of wildlife at all, just always have the camera where you can grab it. So I'll just go through a few pictures here. This is obviously a green shield bug. I was cutting the hedge, saw the green shield bug, thought that'll take a picture. Got the camera, took the picture. And an interesting sort of add-on to this is that Colin Harrison, who I think most of you perhaps know Colin sent me an email the other day saying, what did you do with the shield bug eggs? Because he'd found a shield bug laying eggs on his washing. So that, again, I didn't know the answer. That set me on a little trail of adventure. And it turns out that shield bugs overwinter. And they come out in the springtime, lay their eggs, they hatch fairly quickly. Colin wanted to know how long it would be before the eggs were likely to hatch. And so I was able to tell him they usually start to hatch in June. And then later, he sent me a link to a YouTube article. And this was time-lapse photography of shield bug eggs. And I was absolutely gobsmacked because every single egg, the insect emerged at exactly the same split second. It was like an explosion. All the little tops of the eggs opened, the whole lot shot out at once. It's just quite fascinating because once you see something, and if like me, you're not an expert, just your curiosity takes you off down a path somewhere. And that was quite fascinating. And then I know that butterflies come down to the ground often to take nutrients. Never really seen them doing it before. This was in my garden about 2 or 3 days ago. And I put some seeds in and watered it. And this holly blue was down taking up moisture. Fairly easy to sort of lay down and take a picture of the holly blue if you could get it on when it landed on a slightly raised piece of soil. And really just intent on what it was doing, sucking up moisture. Quite difficult butterflies to photograph in many ways because the blue is really very, very bright, and you really got to, I've often had to struggle to get the exposure right. Then some tortoiseshells came on the same patch of ground, again taking moisture, but I didn't really photograph them because they have their wings spread out, and you finish it with all the background in focus. Whereas here, when it had its wings closed, I could get to a position where I had a blurred background. And then foxes. I was at my son's house in Scotland, in fact, and probably half a mile away across a field, there was a patch of bare earth. So I put the binoculars on it and realised that it was a fox's den. And as I was watching, the mother cleared off. It then sort of had to think about it, and the wind was blowing from me to them. So it took me probably half an hour or more to do a big circular loop and come at them from the other side. And then there was a broken down wall about a foot high. I crawled along behind the wall and got a whole series of photographs of these fox cubs out playing. but they knew I was there. You could see they know that somebody's there behind the wall. But again, I managed to have quite a nice half hour with those. Move on. And then this appeared in my garden just a few days ago, really. And it's a muntjac. My first inclination was to bang on the window. Second inclination was to dash out and chase it away. I didn't want it eating my plants. And then I remembered the camera, and I photographed this actually through the window, through the dining room window. And I've not, nobody's ever really seen this, and I've not sent it into any salons or anything because it sort of looks very staged to me. But on the other hand, it's quite a nice picture of the deer. Moving on. Again, opportunity again. If you've got the camera handy, you can get your pictures. I've spent hours walking up and down riverbanks trying to photograph wagtails. And we pulled into a car park in Stroud. Stream was running down the bottom end of the car park. Started to walk away, and my wife said, some wagtails down there feeding chicks. So back to the car, opened the boot, and again got some pictures of these wagtails. And again, I've not really used this one anywhere because the way the mother's head's turned, you can't see any detail in the mother's head. But on the other hand, it's a lovely picture for me to have and to keep as she's feeding the chicks. And I got a whole sort of series of pictures of these. And then a couple of landscapes, really. 2012. It doesn't seem that long ago, 8 years ago. But in 2012, I was still running big distances. And I went with a friend of mine called Ted, and we had a very cheap holiday, probably the cheapest holiday I've ever had. We flew to San Francisco. We used public transport, train, Amtrak train, and then bus into Yosemite. And then from Yosemite, we walked the John Muir Trail, which goes from Yosemite and finishes up on the top of Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in the contiguous United States. That was our tent, just the two of us. And we took enough food for 10 days. Then we left a food stash where a road had come in fairly close into the mountains and replenished our supplies. We'd left a two gallon bucket with a sealed lid with dehydrated food for the second half of our trip. So it was a 3-week trip, and the only requirement really was to put a tent up near water, so you could, because we carried dehydrated food, and the bags got lighter every day as we ate it. So this is going up Muir Pass, which is what the trail's named after. John Muir was a great naturalist and perhaps the father of the national park movement. And I put this one in really to show you the vastness of the landscape and also the barrenness of it. And here, where my pointer is the trail. Now, they say that if you get lost in this country, then you're well and truly lost, but the likelihood of getting lost is pretty remote because this trail is very well defined. This here, if you can see it, is a hiker on the trail, another hiker on the trail. So it's a vast landscape. In 3 weeks, we only got a map out twice to work out where we were because the trail was pretty well defined. And so this was Muir Pass, but you see how rocky and wild it all is. And there, by the side of the path, were some flowers, which I spent a little bit of time photographing them. My friend was really champing at the bit and getting irritated because there were thunderclouds building up and he wanted to be off the high ground. But I managed to work out what this was. After I got home, I looked it up in wildflower books. I sent it off to people. Eventually, I worked it out. There's something called Sphertia perennis. Again, it's only a high mountain flower. Moving on. Just wanted to show you this picture because, again, you can see the landscape. This is our tent again. This is Ted. And this patch of water here is called Guitar Lake. And our route took us up behind these crags along the skyline, and that was the day we got to the summit of Mount Whitney. And Mount Whitney is just about 14,500 feet, but by then we were well acclimatized. We've been walking at above 12,000 feet for quite a long time, and it's beautiful country, beautiful high-level country to walk in. It's a reasonably good climate as well, and you get acclimatized. So that's from approaching the summit of Whitney, looking back on Guitar Lake. And you can see we were camped just here, where this stream came down so we could get some water. So that was Guitar Lake. This is the summit of Mount Whitney, 14,500 feet. And again, you can see the trail still defined. Trail coming along here, and then round behind these crags and up the top. And I really put these in to show you one picture, and that's this one. And this is a rosy finch. And really didn't have a lot of camera equipment with me because of the weight. I didn't want to carry a lot of weight. So I was really pleased to get this picture. And it's a rosy finch. It's got pride of place in my collection of birds because it's only found at very high altitude in the High Sierra, in the Californian High Sierra. So again, it's always trying to always have a camera ready and just grab the opportunities when you get the chance. So now I'm going to move on to interception. And this is really thinking about, I want to photograph something. Where am I going to find it? When's it going to be about? What can I do? And this is a checkered skipper. And it was declared extinct in England in 1970. And the only place you find it now is within around about a 25-mile radius of Fort William. Now, my eldest son lives up the other side of Scotland, up near Inverness. And for 5 years in a row, after we visited him and left his house, I went across to Fort William hoping to see checkered skippers. And they fly at a very specific time of year, so we timed our visits to him to try and time them with checkered skippers. It snowed, it rained, it did everything it could to stop me seeing one. On the very last time we went, we actually booked a holiday cottage near Fort William so I could spend a week looking for these little blighters, among lots of other things, all the family things. And gave up hope, set off for home on our last day, stopped at the Glencoe Visitor Centre, went for a walk behind the visitor centre in the woods, and lo and behold, checkered skippers on bluebells. And I got my pictures. Beautiful little, is it? Probably the brightest of the skippers. Here's another one on a bluebell. And so you can see the size of it. It's really quite tiny, but a lovely thing really to see. And then green hair streaks. It's our only British green butterfly. And I heard that green hair streaks were fairly plentiful. And I decided I really did want a picture of a green hair streak. Could I find one anywhere? Could I? Blimey. The problem, which I didn't realize at the time, but I realize now, eventually the penny dropped, the problem is that the upper wings are brown. So you go to where you might expect to see them, and what you see is a brown butterfly flying away from you. You think, that's not a green one. It's only when they settle and close their wings that you can see the true colours of the green hair streak. Since I've twigged that, I've seen them on the high moors, I've seen them on Cleve Hill, I've seen them on Minchinhampton Common, I've seen them over in Pembrokeshire. There's quite a few of them about. It had me fooled for several years. And then Adonis Blue, they're really confined to the south of England. And if you want to see one, you won't mistake it again. They're almost iridescent blue. And for a long time, I kept thinking I'd seen one, but eventually realizing what I was seeing were common blues. So one day when the flight time was about right, I went exploring the southern slopes of Minchinhampton Common, and I did find a colony. And the colour is distinctive, but if it's a bit faded, then you maybe confuse it with a common blue because the underwing is very similar. But the main distinguishing feature is these little black lines. The common blue has got a completely white border. Adonis Blue has got little black lines across it. So again, this was intercepting, going out to find where they were and getting some pictures. Same applies to dippers, really. I wanted pictures of dippers. I knew that we were on holiday in Yorkshire. I knew there were dippers on the wharf. So I spent a day walking up and down the river, found 3 places where they had nest sites, 1 place where they were coming down near some flat stones. So I worked out where the light was going to be best, which was perhaps a second walk. And on the 3rd day, I got there really early in the morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning. Sat down in a hollow between some rocks, set the tripod up, and I got a whole series of dippers that have been in the river catching caddisfly larvae and then taking them up to youngsters in a nest underneath the bridge. I've got a friend up there who's a much better naturalist than I am, and about a couple of weeks later, he sent me a photograph of the dipper feeding its chicks, and just a simple message: "Your dipper's chicks have hatched." So there you go. Same guy. I went walking with him up onto the moors to try and photograph grouse, and somehow I don't feel a strong sense of ownership of this picture in a way, because he said, I'll call them in for you. And I won't try and do it now because I can't do it how he did it. But he said, go back, very quickly on a rising note. And it sounds a bit like the grouse's call, but an answer immediately. And this chap kept coming closer and closer. Every time Kelvin did his go back, it came closer. And eventually we got that. And I just loved the red wattles on him. And so close, it's completely wild grouse, but just fooled by my friend's call. Then redwings come in winter for berries. I've got a cotoneaster in the garden, so go out early in the morning, park the car so that the car windows are facing the cotoneaster, go out a little bit later, sit in the back seat, put the window down, and just wait with the camera. This is a very frosty morning, but I got some nice pictures of the redwing coming down for the berries. So again, just intercepting them, anticipating what they're going to do, and you get your picture. And the last one in this series is a sanderling, and that's one of the shorebirds, and it sort of hops around in the surf and then runs away from the wave as the wave comes in. So really, once I've seen them, fairly simple matter to sit in a folding chair, tripod in front of me, no hide or anything. And as the tide came in, these just came running closer and closer. And that picture actually has done quite well in salons. Then influence. You can influence what these things are going to do. And I've got a bay tree just in a pot outside the front door, and it was covered with aphids. And hoverflies and wasps will eat aphids. In fact, there are a lot of hoverflies and wasps on the bush. They cleared it completely of aphids in a couple of days. And in the early part of the year, they're more interested in eating bugs than they are in eating sweet things, which fooled me. I put some jam on a leaf, and I thought, put some jam on a leaf, that'll catch the little blighter and come in and get some jam. Wasn't interested for ages. He was much more interested in getting the aphids. But eventually this wasp came, stuck its tongue out, which you can see, and started sucking up the jam. And again, looking in a field guide, I found there's two types of wasps that you're likely to see in this country. One's called a common wasp, which has got a black line right down the face. This one's called a German wasp. Why, I don't know, but it's a different face. So this is a German wasp. Then I've got some mangers on the outside wall full of plants, and the wren was singing from a hedge. And when it finished singing from the hedge, he was flying across, and he'd burrowed a hole in the manger when making a nest. And I thought, he's singing in the hedge from camouflage, if you like. What he really needs is a perch to sit on. So I found a piece of stick. Perhaps if I'd searched a bit more diligently, I might have found a more interesting piece of stick. Stuck the stick in the hedge so that about a foot of the stick was sticking out of the hedge. And lo and behold, within a very short time, he was sitting on the end of my stick making his song. So that actually influenced where he sat to sing. And again, I set a tripod up on a tripod with a remote to get the picture. And so here he is, dawn chorus really. But here he is with a same twig, same stick, with some nesting material. And the male makes the nest. Then he shows it to the female. If she doesn't like it, he has to make another one. If she does like it, then she lines it with feathers and soft things and makes it a fit place for her eggs and her chicks. So this is the female. Same piece of stick, you notice. And then it's also the female that feeds them. And this picture, she's just coming back to the nest with a spider. I kind of feel sorry for the spider. It just looks like, shouts, help, please save me. But there he is. That's the wren with a spider heading into the nest. So again, influence the behavior to get them to sit on that particular stick, and not really disturbing them at all. It was just a matter of a few seconds of putting the stick into the hedge with one end sticking out where I could, hopefully they would land on. Similar story with the woodpeckers. I had woodpeckers coming into the garden and taking peanuts from a bird feeder. So again, I found a reasonably shaped branch and I hammered a stake into the ground and then tied this to it so that it was vertical. Drilled some holes in it, drilled the holes in it round the side where you couldn't really see them in the picture, stuffed some peanuts in, and before long the woodpeckers abandoned the peanut feeder and came to pick the peanuts out of this piece of stick that I'd put there for them. And again, this was just photographed from the dining room window. Same trick works with nuthatches. And again, on this one, you can actually see he's been pecking at this peanut here. But this one was a bit cute. He worked out how to get the whole peanut out. And so this is a nuthatch. Beautiful bird, I think. And then I think Martin might emphasize with this because he's got tame blackbirds at the moment. This blackbird follows me around the garden because she knows she's going to get fed. And I feed her on, at the moment, I feed her on dried mealworms. I used to like to feed her on live ones, but I ran out and I managed to order some online. I got some dried mealworms. She likes them almost as much. But we had an eruption of ants and I was weeding. I had the camera handy. She was over, perhaps 5 or 6 feet away, picking up beaks full of ants to take them back to the chicks. And here she is feeding one of the chicks. This is just this springtime. And she was feeding it quite close to a compost heap, in fact. And after the birds had gone, I noticed a little rodent come out. So I put some birdseed down, sat comfortably with my back against the greenhouse, with a tripod in front of me. I just waited. I only waited about 5 minutes. And out came this. And it's a little bank vole. So rather not a mouse, and it was really going for little bits of coconut in the birdseed. You've got to be quick though, because slightest movement and they're gone. They're so fast with a beautiful, beautiful golden brown colour. And so again, got 3 or 4 pictures of the bank vole, which I was really very pleased with. And that was just, I would say, perhaps a week, 10 days ago. And then a word about parks and zoos and gardens and reserves. And I think these are great places to go and practice your skills. I think for me as a wildlife photographer, then the wildlife that can come in to parks and reserves is fascinating on it by itself. You know, it's wild and free, it doesn't have to come in. So again, you often find things coming into wildlife parks and reserves that I can photograph. But when it comes to the animals that are sort of resident or captive there, then if I take photographs, I try to take something that's perhaps a little bit different. This is by no means wildlife, or perhaps not even nature. It's obviously a rooster, but I just love the comb and I loved his eye. And the pictures in parks and reserves are not easy to take. You get zookeepers and cage bars and waste paper bins and other animals. So really difficult pictures to get sometimes, but people can get really good ones. This one was just interesting. This was at Bird of Prey Centre, and they were feeding them on day-old chicks. And I thought if I can get one with a chick sticking out of its mouth, that might be fun. So he's just got a leg sticking out of his beak, and that was a day-old chick that they were feeding it. Moving on, there's parks much closer to home. This was in Pittville Park. I don't know, the swans in Pittville Park are resident. I don't know whether they've had their wings clipped or not. I've never really sort of thought to find out. But this actually did quite well in a salon in India. And I suppose these sort of birds are more unusual there. But this is Pittville Park, just a swan with cygnets. Same park. Every year recently, the great crested grebes have come in. Male comes in first, female a bit later, and they usually nest there. So this is I think the male with a stick for nesting. And you can sit on the little platforms where the fishermen, they'll be made for fishermen because they fish in Pittville Lake, in Pittville Park. And you can sometimes catch some of their sort of courting behaviour where they do this lovely dance. I haven't managed to get one where they pass seaweed from one to the other, or waterweed from one to the other, but really quite nice symmetry on these. Moving on. This was taken at Daneway Banks, which is another Gloucestershire Wildlife Nature Reserve, where they've got large blues. They've had a reintroduction programme that's been very successful. The large blues became extinct in the sort of 2/3 of the way through the last century. What they discovered was that ants play a huge role in the life cycle of these butterflies. The ants take their pupa underground and protect them, and the pupa actually feed on ant larvae, ant grubs. And when they hatch in the springtime, they come up out of the anthill and fly. And again, although it's a reserve, I feel that these qualify as being wildlife for me. The thing they had to do there at Daneway was, first of all, to get the habitat suitable for the ants, because it's a particular species of ants. Then they had to get the ants established. Then they could establish the butterflies. But again, this is the large blue, once extinct, and just these black markings on the upper wing that are distinctive, really. Moving on, Farne Islands. The Farne Islands, so many visitors, and the birds are so popular there that they get used to people. And this was an Arctic tern calling to its mate. And a few minutes later, the mate came back bearing a fish as a gift for the Arctic tern. And I like to go to Farne Islands, but it does seem a bit, I don't know what the word is, a bit touristy often, but it's a wonderful place to go, and you can get some great shots. And the next one were guillemots, again on the Farne Islands, and really took this picture because guillemots, there's one type called a bridal. I think they're all the same species, but some of them have got this white mark around the eye and down here, and they're known as bridled guillemots. So it's quite nice to get two guillemots together, a bridled guillemot and an ordinary one. And again, that was on the Farne Islands. And then the last bit is a little bit about photographs for competition, and I call this manipulation. And the PAGB have changed their rules recently. As far as I can understand it, and perhaps Martin will correct me afterwards, it's if it looks like nature, it is nature, and you can clone things in and you can mess about with it, which seems a little unusual to me in that you really shouldn't change the truth of a picture. But I'm working off the FIAP rules, and FIAP say you can't change anything. You've got to be as it was, no cloning. All you can do is your exposure details and that sort of thing. So this was a caracara, again at a bird of prey centre, and he was moving about so fast that I cut his wings off. So I sewed them back on again. Now you don't do that if you're sending a picture to FIAP. It's okay for my sort of wildlife records, but if you get caught, you get banned. So don't sew the wings back on things that you've cut them off. Similarly, I was photographing oyster catchers up in Yorkshire, and really you can't approach a nest site too close. So there was a stream between me and the bird, and I was using a 500mm lens, and I couldn't get a really good viewpoint, but I didn't like this piece of grass here, and I didn't like this rock here. So for my own sort of purposes, I took them out. And I finished up with that, which I quite like. But again, that's now made it ineligible. I couldn't really enter that into a Fiat competition because it's been cloned. I get away with it in PAGB under the new rules, I believe, but not for Fiat. But I think it looks better without that silly blade of grass sticking up the back. And then something that's, I really don't know whether this would be permissible or not. And again, perhaps Martin as a judge might tell me. Took this photograph of a brimstone. What's interesting, it was midday. And photographing at midday, you get shadows under the veins, and it's made the veins stand out, which is quite nice photographically. But I was using my wife's compact at the time, and the depth of field is so that you've got such a messy background. And if you blur the background, just by doing a layer and selecting the top, blur the background, I think it makes a nicer picture. I haven't cloned anything in, I haven't cloned anything out. All I've done is selectively blurred it. I don't know whether that's cheating or not, but there you go. And then this is the last two pictures you'd be pleased to hear. And this picture is a female yellowhammer. It's not been manipulated in any way at all apart from just exposure. And again, it's a picture that's done very well. But I want you just to sort of make a mental note of that branch, because that branch is in the next picture. And it's here. This is that branch. And this is a tree sparrow. Tree sparrows are pretty rare these days, but there's a colony in my son's house up in Scotland. And I didn't like that branch, and I didn't like all this mess here, so I cloned it out. That's now made it ineligible for any Fiat wildlife salon. And just to make sure that it was not going to be mistaken and that it really was manipulated, then I had a picture of a paving slab that I took to National Trust property, and I did a layer over the top with the texture of a paving slab, and just selectively took it off the bird. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I like tree sparrows. Maybe it's just because of the memory of that day. But that's one of my favourite pictures that I've got. And it's the one picture I've got printed and framed and hanging behind my desk in the study. And I'm going to leave you with that. And I hope that's given a flavour of the sort of things that I like to do with my wildlife.